Alex Ben Block.
Good morning. Thank you so much for being here. It's been a terrific NATPE so far. Attendance is clearly up. From what I'm hearing, there's good buzz about the panels, and people are doing business. So everything that Rod and the team set out to do seems to be coming true. And I'm so pleased. We have two extraordinary storytellers, two people who really have not only contributed to the literature of television and media, but broken some of the rules along the way. Interesting conversation about it. I just want to talk a little bit. First, I want to remind you, please, if you have a cell phone, put it on silent. Also, if you want to tweet, I believe it's hashtag NATPE, am I correct? And you're welcome to tweet away and tell the world where you are and what you're doing. You know, NATPE used to just be NATPE, but now it's NATPE/content first. And the reason is that no matter how much technology there is, no matter how many great platforms there are, no matter how many ways there are to deliver this wonderful content to the world, ultimately you have to have wonderful content to deliver. And that's really what this panel and this series about storytellers is about, is you gotta have the goods. You gotta have stuff that people want. You gotta have stuff that's compelling and interesting and provocative. And these days, not only stuff that they wanna see, but stuff they wanna talk about. You know, we always talked about water cooler shows. Well, in the old days, it literally meant a water cooler. It meant the next day you went to the office and you stood around the water cooler and you said, hey, did you see Lost? Wasn't that incredible? Well, these days, the water cooler is also on Facebook. It's on Twitter, and it's on other forms of social media. So all of us are part of the big water cooler of the world, and it starts right here as you Twitter, as you watch, and the buzz that you can build from this. But rather than me talking too much, let's get to these two terrific guys, both of whom are, in my view, a little bit unusual among Hollywood storytellers because of the way that they've done shows that have really literally broken rules and done things that people thought couldn't be done. And I believe that we're going to make the case today that what they've done is changing television, particularly broadcast television, which is now has to rush to catch up to what's going on in cable and online. And it's a whole new world. And I'm going to introduce first Damon Lindelof, and then I'll introduce you to Glen Mazzara. But I think, I'm sure you're all familiar with Damon's work. Certainly Lost from 2004 to 2010 was among the most popular series ever to be on television. And it was an unusual series in that they say things that have a serial nature, where everything isn't quite self-contained in every episode, well, they don't work anymore. Well, this one worked. It worked a lot, and it brought people back. And the storytelling was very unusual from season to season. Things happened that were really quite extraordinary. But Damon not only is a producer and writer of television, he also has pretty amazing credits in the feature film side, having written Star Trek and produced some of them. I think he's written the new Star Trek Into Darkness, Prometheus, Cowboys and Aliens, and he's also involved in an upcoming movie that has a lot of people intrigued, World War Z, which is another interesting script. But you know, Damon, what I want to ask you first is, you're a writer, but you're also a producer. In Hollywood, there's a lot of jokes about writers. You know, one of the old jokes was, the actress is so dumb she slept with the writer. You know, because writers don't always get treated very well in show business. But you're also a producer. As a producer, does it change the way you feel about writers? Do you have a little more sympathy?
Are you asking me if I've ever slept with an actress? I think that there's a vast gulf between television and movies, but certainly in television, one of the really amazing things that I bore witness to very early in my career was that the writer was king, and this word showrunner was being floated around. But my idea of a producer, sort of modeling on the experience that I'd had in the feature business, guys like Jerry Bruckheimer and Don Simpson and Scott Rudin, Joel Silver, those were the guys who were basically ruling the roost when I came out to Los Angeles. But none of them were writers. And so the idea that when I first started working in television, that the men and women who were in charge also happened to be sitting at their laptops and generating pages. And when we turned in our script, they'd rewrite, or they were part of the story breaking process. The first time I saw that, I was like, this is what I want to do. And it wasn't so much about needing to have power as much as it was, this is really exciting. The idea that my job, I thought, ended with turning in a script, but if that was just the beginning, and that I was also casting and being on the set, working in the editing room, dealing with the network, I could really take full responsibility for the finished product. And just when you talk about the movie world, even the credits that you just reeled off, with the exception of the Star Trek movies on which I was also a producer, that is where your job ends. You get hired for a short period of time, you do some writing, and then chances are you came in after someone else, and chances are there's going to be someone after you. And it's very hard to sit there in the movie theater and watch it and feel like that it's yours. You can feel like I was a part of this, but the only real way to kind of do it, I think, is to go whole hog. And so I think that the writer-producer, certainly in television and when you look at movies, there's a purity to a Quentin Tarantino film because he's writing it and he's directing it and he's there's complete and total control. And I think that's why television is having a real renaissance right now. It is, I think, the age of the showrunner that started, kind of back, arguably in the Bochco Milch era of Hill Street, but is still really thriving now.
I want to come back to that, but first let me bring Glen into the conversation. Glen Mazzara, I know you all know about Walking Dead, but what you may not know is he has a long list of other credits in television, producing and writing, going back to certainly one of the earliest, I think, was Nash Bridges with Don Johnson, and we were just talking about that, and there were some colorful adventures there. But there was a show talking about rule breakers called The Shield he also worked on, which at the time broke all the rules about what cop shows were supposed to be. And I want to come back to that in a moment. But among other shows, and each one was very distinctive, Life, Crash, which was really another game changer, Criminal Minds, Hawthorne, which harked back to, I believe you had early experience working in a hospital and you got to bring some of that home. We can come back to that. And I think also you've written the feature Hancock 2, where you're writing it?
No. I just worked on an outline for that.
Oh, okay. Yeah. But of course, Walking Dead is the show that really has changed television. This is a show that Frank Darabont, who's also a very talented producer and writer, started, but you took it over for season 2 and 3, and it went through the roof. And I have to tell you, everybody in television was talking about this show last year, because ultimately in television, they like good scripts, they like good casts, but most of all, they like good ratings. And this show got amazing ratings. I think the opening episode has something like 9 million viewers, which is about 9 times what an average show that stays on the air gets these days. And it was up there, certainly before the DVR count, but even with the DVR count, among the top shows of the entire season. And to be on AMC, a network that some people don't even think is fully distributed, and to get that kind of following and to create a cult status around it really is amazing. And I want to play off what Damon was saying in terms of being a showrunner, a writer, and a producer. Does that give you that level of control once you're into this that allows you to really look at those episodes and say, yes, I did that? Because there's so many people, it's such a collaborative medium. Is it possible in television to be that creative force that you can feel like Picasso painted the painting and he knows that's his painting? Is this your painting?
Oh, that's interesting. When I first came onto the show, I came on to be Frank's number 2. And then there was a change made in leadership, and so I became the showrunner. I never went for the showrunner gig. I just sort of felt that since I believed in what Frank was doing, I could, it was better to have somebody from inside the organization try to get through that crisis. And I had to make certain decisions about the show because I didn't feel it would be right to try to mimic what Frank was doing. He has a different voice. He's a very talented filmmaker, and I didn't want to just do my version of what I thought he would want. So I had to own it, and I pushed the horror element front and center. I really wanted people to feel it was a thrill ride every week, that you were sitting on the edge of your seat. Oh my God, don't open that door, watch out, all of those fun things. I didn't really see that being done on TV. And then as we went into the new season, we have an incredible team of writers and producers, and it's a very, very collaborative medium. But the showrunner is the person who has to say, okay, we've got 15 people giving notes, we have to go this way. And my rule is I try to do what I love. If I can really, say this is a scene that I love, this is a story that works for me, I try to get everybody to buy into that. And there's, as I said, there's a lot of talented people, and they all contribute ideas. And I don't think this is the show where I would say, I'm coming up with these ideas. It's by myself. You know what it's like. It's you start the conversation. Somebody adds something. Somebody else adds something, and the episodes take on their own life. They get their own energy, and you just kind of try to rely on instinct and teamwork and everything to do the best show possible.
But to use the old cliche, the buck stops here, though, with the showrunner, right?
That's true. Yes.
And I do want to ask you just one quick question relating to when you left the show. We've heard that there were creative differences. And what you were just saying is very interesting to me because it is a very collaborative process, and yet the showrunner has to make ultimate decisions, and you did bring your own vision to this. In terms of being a storyteller, being a showrunner, can you just share with us a little bit of how these things, how the most successful show on TV can happen, and then still the creative differences come in and you end up moving on to something else?
Well, to be honest, I did not sign on to the show to be the showrunner, as I said. So I sort of had to, grab the wheel while we were going through a storm. And I'm happy to say, I was able to contribute, and we got through that storm. But when I think people involved with the show are looking at the long-term plan, they want something different. There's and what those differences are, you would have to ask AMC. But I didn't. It's a different position than, say, on Lost, where you are a creator and you can say, this is the fabric, this is the tone of the show. I was sort of a hired gun who was coming in to support the creator of the show, and through odd circumstances, I ended up, becoming showrunner. And I'm just glad that I was able to contribute and I didn't mess up the show. I see it as a win.
I can't.
But you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But when you're the creator, you can say, this is what the show is. I didn't create the show. I didn't create the comic book. So I just am glad I was able to contribute.
And also, I can't speak for Glenn, and I don't know what the climate is on that show or at AMC. There's different cultures at every network. But I do think that there's a bit of a misconception in that if a show is doing very, very well, that there's a laissez-faire attitude about like, well, they must be doing something right, we're going to leave them alone. In fact, on Lost, the opposite was true. For the after we did the pilot, I think that everybody was saying, oh my God, how are you going to sustain this? I mean, okay, the plane crashed, now they're on the island, but what's episode 17? And I was like, I don't know what episode 4 is. This wasn't our idea. We sort of inherited it, and we're doing our best to just sort of figure out what a story looks like. We have this idea that we're going to do these flashbacks so that we can retard the speed of the storytelling on the island. So we tell these little New Yorker short stories every week, just focusing on one character. And if we do it in relative real time, so it's not like days and months are going by and suddenly they're the Swiss Family Robinson and they build these huge structures, that maybe a season of the show would just be the first 30 days on the island. But beyond that, we didn't know what the storytelling was. And so there was a period during the first 6 episodes or so where we were kind of left alone because nobody really knew how to notes the show. And then the show premiered. And it got very big ratings, and then there were suddenly 7 executives that I'd never met before. Like, oh my God, don't fuck it up. Like, just this feels like a little too weird. Like, can you pull this back? And so I do, but I do think that idea of looking at it in terms of, well, it's doing well, and therefore just go do your thing, doesn't exist, because the reality is certainly everybody in this room realizes it's we're on the creative side of it, but it's a business, and the most expensive thing that you can possibly do on a television show is produce 3 seasons of it and then get canceled. So when it's in that sort of nascent first trimester of its creative life, that's all you can think about, and it gets micromanaged. And amongst my peers, that's almost always what I hear.
I want to ask both of you, we were talking about getting notes. So I'm a journalist, I know a little bit about this, maybe some other people know more than I do, I'm sure. But who do you get the notes from? I have some idea, but especially like on Lost, when it becomes a hit show, I know you're going to get notes from the network representative who's on the show. But as the show gets more successful, my guess is you get notes from higher and higher up the food chain.
And Twitter.
Would you each of you just share with me the kind of notes you get, how you deal with it on shows? Just in general, all the shows you've done.
Well, on Walking Dead, for example, because I was coming into a culture with all the different writers and producers, and now I was stepping up, I really wanted to build that team. I wanted everybody invested in what we were doing. I didn't think it would be right to say, okay, there's a new sheriff in town. That wasn't my attitude, and I felt like the show would have definitely have failed if that was the case. So we have a very extensive note process internally on the show, where we do have, between the different writers and post-production supervisors and non-writing producers, we have 15 different producers on that show.
Wow.
They all give notes. And I have an open door policy to the actors, where the actors can give notes. And so if we have a 48-page script, by the time you print out all of the notes, and including one set of notes from the studio and network, which is the same entity, it's AMC. A lot of times you have the studio and the network are separate. So on a 48-page script, by the time I print out all the notes, I could have 30, 35 pages of notes. Now, there's no way you could take every note. There's no way you can make everybody happy. But what I do is I just sort of, go through and do a rewrite on the entire script, trying to, include all of those different voices, all those different perspectives. There's a lot of talented people, and you want to, and they're raising great points. At the end of the day, though, you're never going to get consensus. So that's where, I have to say, I feel this is the best possible script, and for the most part, I've been able to do exactly what I felt was right for the show. It's supportive, everybody buys in, everybody has a voice, but at the end of the day, somebody has to make the call, otherwise it's just chaos.
Yeah, I sort of echo everything that Glenn just said, and the thing that you have to keep in mind, it might be a little bit different in the cable space, but I suspect it's not that different. It's just over fewer months. But we made 25 episodes of Lost the first season, 24 the second, 23 the third. And so the pragmatic reality of your day is that at any one time you're working on 5 different episodes, and you're getting 5 different sets of notes. One is notes on the latest cut, one is on the outline you just submitted, one is on the script that you just submitted, one is on the story doc. So and then you're sort of dropping out to just have general sort of like, this is the state of the show conversations at any one time. But the pragmatic reality of the job is that every 8 days you have to generate a new 55-page script and document. So I think the velocity at which it moves is really beneficial for television, whereas in movies, by time a movie that I wrote, from the moment that it's kind of conceived to the moment that it's in front of people, can be about an average of 3 years, 2 or 3 years. That's a lot of time to basically take notes. And in TV, it's just sort of like, I hear you, I think I agree with you, I'm gonna try that, or I'm not entirely sure I agree with you, and here's why, and then you talk it out, and then you move on. And it's, the notes that really mean something significant from the producer standpoint is the notes that affect production, because oftentimes you will write a script that's just too fat, or it involves too many locations, and you're going to go $350,000 over budget, and that's a problem that you have to solve. So you try to focus on the pragmatic notes, but you have to try to appease everybody. And I think obviously the notes that come from actors are very significant as well, because if they have to play something that makes no sense to them, you have to sort of take the time to hear them out, and you might be the writer who created this character, but they're the person who has to portray that character. So it's sort of like you're both parents of that character, and just like any parent that's rearing a child, there are going to be fundamental disagreements about what's best for them, and it's sort of an arbitrary construct, but those are really valuable notes, I find.
You know, if I could say, the other thing is that, you know, you're not just delivering a script every week that no one has no idea what's coming. I mean, you arc out the season. You know, on The Walking Dead, we would get the writers together in a room and arc out the season and then pitch that to the rest of the producers, incorporate their thoughts, and then bring that to the network. So by the time, you know, everybody sort of knows where you're starting, what you're going for, and a lot of the notes are about execution of particular things. But any of the major character payoffs, the moments, those arcs, people are saying, well, we discussed this, could we dial this in? So the notes are never, hopefully, you know, what is this? This is a complete surprise, you know?
You know, both of you mentioned getting notes from the actors. I'm intrigued by this concept because for the public, it's like the actors are the show. They think, oh, this really is the character. They somehow made up their own dialogue and decided how the whole thing would happen. Of course, that isn't the way it is. There's talented producers and writers who really are calling the shots. And yet on both of your shows, you're saying your actors did get involved. So, and I think this is true for Lost also, but particularly with Walking Dead, you sometimes killed off these actors. A lot of people got killed off in your series.
That's right.
So now you know, there's got to be this temptation, like this guy gave me so many notes, they're so idiotic. I think it's time for him to go.
No. If only it was that easy.
That is ridiculous.
Yes.
Sir.
No.
But
No,
I mean, what I'm saying is you broke the rules by the way you did this. How did you get away with it?
Well, you get them to buy into that story. You approach the actor and say, listen, we think this is the best thing for the show. You know, and I dealt with this a little bit on The Shield when we would kill off characters. And somehow I'm always the person who has to make that call on whatever show I go to. But you end up, if you were just killing a character for a shocking moment and the story ends, it's not going to be great. What you want is this death then propels the story forward. This affects these characters, and now you're finding more story. It's something that becomes inevitable in the arc of the story. And so you have to do your homework, and then you call the actor and say, you know, or meet with them and then say, okay, this is what's best for this character. This is the appropriate ending. This is what's best for the show. And, you know, for the most part, a lot of them will say, okay, you know, no one's happy to ever be killed off. Some of them go, you know, kicking and screaming. But it's difficult, but they realize, particularly on The Walking Dead, it's a zombie show. It's a horror show. I mean, they know what they've signed up for.
And they get to be a zombie for a while.
Maybe, yeah. Or they're just eating or whatever. Yeah. And they also know that I take that very seriously, that, you know, I think the number of character deaths was something that I amped up on the show as opposed to Frank. So they realize that, you know, I'm very, you know, consider all of that very seriously, but that doesn't stop them from giving notes. Everybody participates. I don't think there are any actors on the show who are afraid to give notes because they're going to be killed off. It's never punitive. It's fully a creative, story-based decision.
Maybe it's even the opposite, that they feel like they need to be in your face and be part of the creative process, so you make sure their character continues to have interesting storylines.
That's possible, yeah.
You know, the other thing that applies to Lost and certainly to Walking Dead was the unpredictability. That, you know, sometimes you go to a movie or you watch a TV show and you go, what just happened? You know, the whole thing just changed. Everything is so different. And that unpredictability can work for you or it can work against you. The audience can say, oh, these people are nuts. This isn't going where I thought it was going to go. I'm gone. Or they can say, gee, it's so unpredictable. I better stay right here by the TV set or make sure I stay and watch every minute of this movie. Talk about that fine edge that both of you have walked in terms of making it unpredictable, but still sticking with what your audience and what your fellow producers and creators expect, if you would.
I think what Glenn just said is really the key to it all, which is you can't just do it. You can't just be shocking for shocking's sake. You can't just have twists because that's what everybody's expecting. And ultimately, the difference between good unpredictable and bad unpredictable is earning it. You know, is basically sort of laying the track and saying, okay, by the time I arrive at this moment, it's sort of undeniable that I could have done it any other way, and yet you're still surprised. So I don't want to spoil anything for Walking Dead, but there was a moment halfway through season 2, the barn. Somebody walks out of the barn, and you're surprised in the moment, but they had laid track for it for many almost the entire season leading up to that moment. So it felt like it was undeniable. And on Lost all the time, you do start to feel like, especially when a show gets branded on its unpredictability or its shocking twists and surprises. And one of the main criticisms of the show, certainly going into the second season, but it started to crop up during the first, was that its pacing. It's like, this just feels like it's filler. It's like, oh, it's filler because people are talking to each other and nobody's dying or running after each other with a knife in the jungle this week. And we sort of realized, okay, but there's a reasonable expectation that, if you're going to commit an hour of your time to watch Lost this week, that we're going to show you the most eventful hour that happens on the island. Nobody wants to see the talent show episode, although it would have been spectacular. But ultimately, you sort of have to earn it, and you live and die by the sword. And we did over 120 hours of that show, and it'll only sustain so many twists before the audience throws up their hands and goes, this is just ridiculous, which, along the way, many people did. And you just have to do, you have to follow your gut and do the best kind of storytelling you can. And I wish that I could sit here and say, I've learned how to do it now. I will never make mistakes again. I have mastered the art of unpredictability. But that it's just trial and error.
I agree with everything you're saying, and I think part of it is keeping the shows grounded, keeping the people invested, the audience invested in the characters every week. I think Lost is a great show. It's a seminal show, and it's very influential because you really cared about those characters, and whether or not they were, flashing here or flashing back here or whatever was happening, you cared about them, you were invested. And so then when something was surprising to them or something that affected one of those characters in a profound way, it affected you as an audience member. And that's been a huge influence on The Walking Dead. Because we sort of, we talk about Lost a lot. We try to rip it off without being blatant about it. But you want people to feel invested in the character, because what's interesting about The Walking Dead is I see it as a horror movie. And people really cry when people die, or you have these emotional payoffs. When you go to a horror movie in the theater, you don't really cry when somebody gets killed. You just go, okay, they're dead, keep going, that sort of thing. So it's been a unique type of storytelling on TV that I haven't seen too much of, and I think part of it, you have that surprise, but those surprises wouldn't work if you weren't showing up to see the characters every week.
And sorry, I just want to add that it sounds like it's just something that you have to say, but it's absolutely true that that what makes television work is your relationship with the characters, and the plot mechanics are basically a way to make that happen and understand how they react in certain situations. But that's what the audience really cares about. And I think for Lost, this isn't to say that they don't care about other things, but it was a show that was built on a mystery platform or a predictability platform. And there are always going to be people who need to flip to the end of the book the minute that they think they know who the killer is, just to check if they were right. They don't, because there's a certain security in knowing what's going to happen. But then sometimes that person will flip to the end and they were wrong, and they'll have one of two reactions. They'll go like, oh, that's awesome that it's different than what I thought it would be. And the other reaction is, the book is wrong. And one of the things that's great, I think, about The Walking Dead is I've been a huge fan of the comic book graphic novels that Robert Kirkman wrote, which we were ripping off, Lost. So it's the snake eating its own tail. But one of the great things about the series very quickly declared itself as saying, some of these characters are the same, but Shane, for example, who died very, very early on in the comic series, lives and goes on, and because there was so much grist for the triangle between Rick and Laurie and Shane that you guys identified in a television format. This is something that we're going to play to, and there's a tension. having read the book and feeling like, well, I know how this turned out before, but now I'm in completely undiscovered territory and anything can happen. That's very exciting for me as a viewer, the anything that can happen sort of principle of it all. Some people are uncomfortable with it. They, that's why the CSIs and the Criminal Minds and the self-contained sort of Law and Order franchises also are completely and totally viable, because everything gets resolved within that, in the space of 1 hour, and there's comfort in that.
Well, in fact, much of broadcast television, certainly, not as much cable, has moved back toward that self-contained thing because they're so nervous about new audience coming in and not knowing what's going on. Which leads to my question, which is about backstory. One of the hallmarks of Walking Dead, and to some extent Lost, was you didn't do that much backstory. If you came in from week to week, you weren't going to tell us everything about those characters all over again, because it would bore a lot of your audience. On the other hand, sometimes even the people who regularly watch, from episode 1 to episode 10, can't quite remember why it matters that this character is doing what he's doing, or that there's some retribution for the kind of person he is. So talk to me about backstory. How do you walk that line, have enough backstory to make everybody know what's going on, but not so much backstory that you begin to bore the people who are cult fans of your show?
That's a great question. It's tricky because sometimes I think a lot of our fans who are genre fans, okay, so horror and science fiction, and I think science fiction a lot of times will, excuse me, jump the time-space continuum. It'll go back and forth, and sometimes I think people want to know, how did the outbreak start? Where were these people when all of this started? And they want that sense of backstory. And I don't find that interesting. It's not an element of Robert's graphic novel, and I think it would slow down the present-day storytelling, which I see as a horror film. Most horror films that I'm familiar with don't break and go and fill in backstory, okay? And there's also been audience frustration where we have people stopping the action and giving long speeches about, existential angst or what have you. So I think the show works best when people are, figuring it out on the fly, and tension is as high as possible, and they're trying to, make the best choice out of two horrible, alternatives. So I have been getting away without a lot of backstory. I think it works for me as a storyteller for this particular show. There may be other shows where I think, it's necessary. But I just feel it would throw you out. In a way, it would stop the horror and make the show feel safe. And I don't think people come to The Walking Dead to feel safe. It's not comfort food, like you're saying. It's something it's a thriller, and it has to be in the moment. I just think backstory is just not going to service that vision of the show.
Damon?
Yeah, I think what's really interesting about the question is, and I put it to sort of a larger question, and obviously thought and talked about this a lot while the show was on, because I'm also a huge fan of television myself, which is, what's the best way to consume these shows? And I think that I've experienced everybody on the parabola of the Lost universe, people who watched the show religiously every single episode and loved it, people who watched every single episode and wished that they could have those 6 years back. And then hi, I know you're in here somewhere, and I'm sorry. But one of the really interesting things to come out is that people, the show's been off the air now for almost 3 years, and now people will say, I didn't watch the show while it was on. I know there were a lot of people talking about it, but I just kind of missed the boat, and I felt like it was too late for me to get on. But then I bought it on DVD, or I streamed it on Netflix, and I watched it. I basically watched all 6 seasons over the course of, fill in the blank, 2 weeks, a month. And for those people, it's almost been universally positive, because they were spared the sort of anxiety and stress of the wait between the weekly episodes and also the seasons. The idea that certainly the last 3 seasons we would end in May, and then we wouldn't come back again until January. So expectations build up to a certain degree at that point. But then one of the comforts of knowing that ultimately the way that your work is going to be viewed is more like someone reading a novel. Because the idea of essentially saying like, you know, singling out an episode, you don't read a book and go like, man, that book was really good, but chapter 17 was just phenomenal. It all just kind of comes out in the wash. And you know, because I was working on Lost, I didn't get to watch all these amazing shows that were on and while it was on because we were working so hard. But when Lost ended, I watched all about, you know, start to finish The Wire, start to finish Battlestar Galactica, start to finish Friday Night Lights, you know, all these amazing shows. And I'm just like, I can't imagine what it would have been like to have to watch them, you know, over the period of 4 or 5 years versus the 2 weeks in which I watched them. And then you're completely and totally absolved of what you're discussing in terms of, you know, nobody needs to catch you up because that just happened 2 days ago for you. Mm-hmm. But when you're in an episodic construct, so Walking Dead is coming back in a couple weeks and it'll have been off, there is that part of your brain that's like, all right, what was going on when we left? Like, but if you drop the audience right in the middle of it, it's actually on them to sort of figure it out. Mm-hmm. It's like you can go on the internet, like you can watch that last episode again, you can ask a friend, so the resources are available, but the minute that you start preaching or soliciting, trying to get new people in the tent, the people who have been there all along are like, yeah, we know. You know, I thought, you know, why don't you reward the people who have been here all along instead of trying to get more people in the tent? And by the way, the more people who come in the tent, you know, the less special I feel because I was an early adopter.
Mm-hmm. You know, and the other thing is when you do, and certain episodes, when you tackle them, you have certain criteria. So a season premiere, a mid-season finale, a mid-season premiere, a season finale, those things have certain payoffs. You know, in a mid-season premiere, you have to not give somebody as much of an entry point, but still a little entry point, sure. Certainly for a season premiere. So there are different types of episodes over the course of a season where you do have to be mindful of new audience, but you can't do a total reset.
At the beginning of every season, ABC would say to Carlton and I, we need to do a special, like an hour-long catch-up special. And we are going to interview you and Carlton, and then we'll show like clips of the show. And by the time we got to like the 3rd year, and we had to sort of explain, here's everything that happened till now, we just realized how insanely ridiculous the show was. It's like, nobody who's never seen the show is going to sit here listening to me explain like that there's black smoke out there in the jungle, and then say, oh, I got to watch me some of that. You know, so it's just like the less said, the better, I think. But
you know, our time is flying by here, but I want to ask you one other thing, because if you were in television 20 years ago, and flash forward to today, one of the big differences is social media and the platforms that the internet make available. And a lot of times in an episode or in a season, there's room for the audience, especially the cult audience who really gets into these shows, to debate what do they really mean? Where are they really going with this? Is that done on purpose? And when they do that, do you pay attention to it? Does it affect what you do? And unfortunately, we only have a few minutes left, but give me your thoughts, if you would.
Well, yeah, it's something I've been thinking about. I don't think we put things in a show to, you know, have the audience debate or whatever. You know, we try to tell the best story we can, and hopefully the audience will be that invested that they'll want to debate. You know, a lot of times they'll debate certain things, and you want to jump into the fray and clarify something or respond. It's hard not to take some of the criticism personally.
And will you do that? Will you Twitter back to them?
No, I've stopped doing it. I want the work to stand on its own. I used to do it when I was new to social media. You know, I just joined Twitter a year ago, and I wasn't sure how to use it. And now I use it to engage with the fans, but I don't have to explain everything. Let the work stand for itself. And people are going to debate it in the same way that people debate their sports teams, they debate, you know, they're invested. It's exciting to them. They want to talk about it. It's not necessarily that they're looking for some resolution. They just want to talk about it because they love it. So the fact that I'm lucky enough to work on a show where people are that invested, trust me, people were not tweeting about other shows I've worked on or even watching those shows. So this is kind of, you know, great to have that, to be a point of discussion.
Damon, we got to wrap up in a minute, but I want to hear your response.
Yeah, we experienced a real paradox on Lost, which was there were 2 emergent questions over the life of the show that we heard, and I still get asked now. And question number 1 is, are you making it up as you go along? You know, is there some sort of a plan? And question number 2 was, how big of an impact does the audience have? Do you listen to what the audience has to say about the show? And people don't realize that these questions are really in complete opposition to each other. So question 1 is, are you making it up as you go along? You want the answer to that question to be absolutely not. We have a binder. It's a playbook. We know exactly where we're going and how to get there, and we are not going to deviate from it. Don't worry, mommy and daddy have got everything under control. That's the answer. Question number 2 is, how involved are we, the audience? Do you hear our voice? Can we influence the show? And you want the answer to that question to be, yes, you totally influence the show. We listen to you, and if you don't like something, we change our minds. And if you love something, we do more of it. And then you go, well, what about the binder? And then they look at you and basically say, like, I don't accept your paradox. You have to find a way to do both. And so I think that the way that we started doing both was we had a plan. If the plan wasn't working, we had to change it ourselves. But we had to engage with the audience constantly. So you have to talk to them. You have to say, we hear you. We know you don't like this. We didn't like it either. Or mistakes were made. And so we had a podcast. We went on Twitter. My Twitter feed, a big part of it is basically for people who flame me, who don't like the show, and follow me on Twitter just to tell me that they hate what I do. I like to tweet back at them and say, I heard you. You
want to give us your Twitter handle?
At Damon Lindelof.
How about you?
At Glen Mazzara.
All right, well, there's no debate about one thing. These are two of the most talented, creative people in all of television today. I think we could talk for hours, but our time is up. So I'm asking you to please join me in a big round of applause for two of the best people in TV.